With just about any media series, patterns are bound to emerge, whether by intention or by chance. For mystery game series like Ace Attorney and Danganronpa, one of the most well-known of these is third case syndrome. For those unaware, third case syndrome is a fan-made term, referring to how the third cases, or chapters in these games, tend to have the least to do with the main plot. This usually means little to nothing of importance to the overarching plot happening in Ace Attorney, while Danganronpa usually just has these cases to kill off a few side characters. Both of these can easily lead to these cases being seen as little more than filler. They're also often considered the worst in their respective games as well, though there are exceptions. For the Danganronpa series, third cases also stand out for having multiple victims, which adds more potential pitfalls. Across the main series, most of the focus tends to be put on one of the victims, while the other fades into the background. Another problem fans have with third cases is how the killers tend to have more selfish and even unhinged motives, in contrast to the more sympathetic killers in almost every other case. What may be the most glaring issue, though, is how some of these cases have jarring leaps in logic or gaps in key information. Danganronpa 2's third case is what I'd consider the most infamous example of this. It features a victim whose murder weapon never turns up, and even an inconsistency with how fast the killer would have to move to set up the crime scene without being detected. Interestingly, I find fangans tend to fall into some of the same tropes of third cases, for better or for worse, mostly worse. I won't name names, but the ones I have seen often feature multiple victims without much in-story reason for it, a more unhinged killer, and several use the controversial despair disease motive, or a variation of it. Even the best fangans can run into trouble making sure everything lines up. Some try to just roll with it, but end up getting squashed by the proverbial ball, while others go for more subversion, to mixed results. With all of that said, I feel Penguinronpa's third case, while not what I'd consider its best material, is a good example of how to handle a middle chapter with multiple victims. Though it's not the most involved, the chapter is integral to the story. Without it, Penguinronpa as it is now would be missing a massive piece of its plot. Chapter 3's events and their consequences are tied to several key character arcs, providing a natural continuation of the events of Chapter 2, while also pushing the narrative into its starting point for Chapter 4. Before we take a closer look at Chapter 3, here's a quick recap of events so far. After mysteriously passing out while on a field mission, protagonist Agent wakes up to find themselves and a small group of other penguins as the only remaining inhabitants of Club Penguin Island. Before long, consistent nuisance Herbert P. Bear appears, sporting a similar appearance to Monokuma, and introduces himself as Monobert. He explains the situation of the killing game everyone is now in, and adds his crab sidekick Klutzy into the mix. Monobert explains that all the penguins present, as well as Klutzy, are going to be competing against each other in this killing game for a chance to be teleported to the new world he has prepared. The first motive involves the reveal of a traitor amongst the group, eventually resulting in the accidental murder of PSA and EPF director Ant Arctic by Sensei, who is then brutally executed. Not long after, the threat of the New World and all its inhabitants being blown up prompts EPF Puffle handler Paige to kill pirate Captain Rockhopper, the shock of which throws the group into disarray. It is here that Chapter 3 begins. One of the first aspects of Chapter 3 I noticed more in a rewatch was how character dynamics were handled. As usual, Tofu does an all-around good job of establishing where everyone stands with each other, exploring new dynamics, following up on existing ones, and laying the groundwork for what's to come. I find Chapter 3 is something of a special case among the series, as its early scenes show how the nature of the killing game is getting to the characters. It begins with Agent in their igloo struggling to cope with how the killing game has gone on for a week at this point. Things are no better at the morning's group meeting in the coffee shop. Dot says she can't afford to trust anyone due to Paige's betrayal, and lashes out at Cadence and Frankie for their ill-thought-out plan in Chapter 2. We see more friction between her and other characters like Rory before she leaves by herself. In general, this point in the story tends to be a natural place to have a split in the group like this, or at least a noticeably lower mood. I see it tending to happen in the main series and fangans alike. At the equivalent point in the story, Trigger Happy Havoc has a brief scene focused on a distraught Aoi before later showing us how broken Kiyotaka has become as a result of Mondo's death. Danganronpa Another One has a depressed Yuki wondering what he should do as everyone is dying around him. Meanwhile, Akane's mental health diminishes as she struggles to understand Ayame's actions. With how a Danganronpa story is structured, these reactions make sense. While the first trial would come as a massive shock to those who survive it, the second has the role of giving the cast the impression that this cycle of murder and execution is the new norm moving forward. One way or another, at least one person would have killed or attempted to kill someone knowing of the consequences of their actions by this point. With new areas to explore, it's not long before the rest of the cast split up to investigate. Interestingly, the groups formed here generally stick together for the entire chapter, each with their own reasons to do so. Cadence and Frankie are quick to go off as a pair, already being familiar with each other's company and relying on each other for emotional support. Agent, Klutzy, Rory, and Gary form one team, with the relationships for almost every combination of them getting some screen time. They also do most of the investigation into what led to the killing game that we see. Meanwhile, Shadow Guy, aka Sam, Gamma Gal, aka Amy, Rookie, and Jetpack Guy make up the third group. They spend most of the chapter setting up and performing the play. The last group is of particular interest here, as from this point on, Sam and Amy start getting more characterization. In their 2021 Q&A, Tofu said they consider Chapter 3 to be a midpoint for them. It bridges the gap between their simpler personalities and their more fleshed out ones going forward. Thus far, they've mostly just been nice and helpful, but haven't done much to stand out on their own. But after finding a vital clue in Chapter 1 and watching recordings of some of their plays in Chapter 2, we see the two actors put on an actual live play here. They even bring Rookie and Jetpack Guy into the loop, and their excitement at the former writing his own play is honestly pretty cute. While they haven't yet grown into their new personalities as a comedic serious duo like Rookie and Jetpack Guy, they make for some good entertainment for the time being. Speaking of which, Rookie and Jetpack Guy see some more development on their side of things. It's implied JPG worked with Rookie to write the script for his play, which features the latter saving him by using his own jetpack. It's a nice follow-up on JPG lending his all-important namesake in the previous chapter to give him some more confidence. Agent even takes some comfort in how close they've been getting as the group investigates the nightclub. However, the two still have yet to properly discuss their feelings with each other due to the circumstances they've found themselves in. While it does take some convincing from Rookie to get him to join in on the play, the usually stern Jetpack Guy softens up a bit and makes a genuine attempt to step out of his comfort zone. As for the other foursome, there's quite a bit to unpack. We of course have more bonding between Agent and Klutzy, such as the former showing concern for a scratch mark on the crab's shell, confronting Monobert suspecting he was the cause of it, and the two having some fun with a beach ball. Towards the end of daily life, Klutzy continues his helpful streak by leading Agent down some old mine tunnels to a cave which leads to the wilderness, and trying to tear down a barricade. However, his inability to properly communicate with anyone continues to be a problem when the Jetbot attacks Agent from the shadows. Gary is also around for most of the pair's interactions and lends his own support, such as when he reinflates the beach ball after Klutzy pops it by accident. There's quite a bit of emphasis put on Gary and Agent's relationship as they discuss their concerns about the killing game and Dot's behavior as of late. Both characters have the idea of getting back into the PSA headquarters as a high priority and are very open to each other's suggestions about planning their next move. They also decide to discuss potential theories as to how Herbert became so powerful in so little time. As a quick side note, I also like how even in what could be considered a filler chapter, quote-unquote, there are still some important plot beats. For example, the reveal of the aforementioned Jetbot partially pays off one of Monobert's reveals at the end of Chapter 2. We also get set up for Gary's theories on Monobert in Chapter 4, which leads to a slew of reveals regarding Monobert's identity and motives in the later parts of Chapters 4 and 5. Getting back on topic, from this point on, we start to see the family-like dynamic the EPF agents have with each other. After a failed attempt to reconcile with Dot, Gary invites Agent for a walk to the cove to de-stress. There, the inventor gives his personal theory as to why Dot is taking the situation so differently from everyone else, which ties back to the severe consequences Chapter 2 had of an EPF agent betraying the group. During these more heartfelt scenes, Gadget Dad, an original music track by Tofu which remixes the classic Gadget Room theme into a slower, sadder-sounding song, plays in the background. While original music has appeared as early as Chapter 1, it's in Chapter 3 where it really starts to make itself known, and I love it. Club Penguin itself already has a solid soundtrack, but Tofu remixing these songs for this fan project really shows how much they're willing to go the extra mile for the series. Despite how supportive Agent and Gary's relationship is, the two still worry for the other's well-being, which leads to the last member of this tetrad, Rory. While he has a relatively minor role in both Club Penguin and debatably in Penguinronpa, Chapter 3 has Rory as one of the main characters on display, and with that comes a focus on his working relationship with Gary. At one point, Gary expresses concern at the handyman's idea of drilling underground to see if the force fields surrounding the island also go under it, fearing the island would flood. However, Rory is confident the inventor can whip up something in case the island does start sinking, pointing out how he created a prototype aqua grabber out of nothing but spare parts. Later, when he's drilling in the caves, Agent confesses their concern about Gary to him, and Rory responds that Gary did the same, but for Agent. To solve this, he proposes getting together for some morning pizza the next day to help calm their nerves. Throughout the story, Rory comes across as a hard-working, down-to-earth penguin with a few fun quirks, like his tendency to use odd figures of speech often relating to food, or his preferences on arcade games, to flesh him out more. Given his presentation as the ultimate handyman, he has a desire to fix things, including the well-being of those he cares about. To describe him in a way I think he'd describe himself, he's the skewer to everyone's kebab, the sandwich pick to their sandwich. I'll have more to say about Rory later, but his interactions with Gary and Agent in this chapter alone do a lot to show how genuine he is in his efforts to keep everything and everyone around him in safe working order. As for the other three characters, each has an important role to play in this chapter on their own. Collectively though, they serve an important purpose in showing the stress the killing game causes. Penguinronpa has a unique challenge in getting its murders to happen, since for the most part, the characters at least know of each other if they don't have a pre-existing relationship. Combine this with Club Penguin Island being an idyllic place where little goes wrong and has a united organization in the elite penguin force to defend it, and writing drama for these characters can prove difficult. However, with the first two chapters ridding the group of their best leader figure and their full trust in the EPF, it makes sense for a few to splinter off. Cadence and Frankie are off-screen for much of this chapter's daily life. Most mentions of them come from other characters commenting on how they're alone. They're also involved in one major incident where Frankie is revealed to have been exposed to an execution simulator rigged up from an arcade machine in the nightclub's lounge. On top of being a nod to how this same arcade cabinet and its background music was used for the previous executions, the idea of the characters being able to experience their own punishments without actually killing someone first or dying is a really interesting concept. Following on from some more subtle signs of him showing concern for the safety of his bandmates in Chapter 2, it's clear the pressure of the killing game is getting to him, and Cadence is struggling to keep him in check. Dot, meanwhile, acts very differently from usual in this chapter, still reeling from Paige's actions. She's a lot more abrasive. She calls out Cadence and Frankie for their plan last chapter, brushes off Gary and Agent when they try to console her, shows up last when Monobert demands everyone's presence, and of course restates her intent to end the killing game. While Tofu has admitted they would have liked to do more to show her relationship with Paige, there are a few signs of it here. Aside from Gary talking about her and her reactions, one of the photos in Dot's igloo shows her with Paige, hinting at how close they were. Despite this shift in her attitude, Dot still comes across as someone who will lend a helping hand, or flipper, if she has to be around the group. Early on, when Rory points out how her behavior could be a cover for planning a murder, Dot states she has no intention to do so, and would consider herself a hypocrite if she did. In a later talk with Agent, it's implied and later confirmed that Dot was doing her own investigation, though she doesn't trust Agent enough to tell them what she's found. As the days pass, some cracks under her aloof exterior start to show. When she finds Agent and Klutzy in the mines, she's visibly surprised when the former says they were attacked, and helps the two get back to the surface. Dot's scenes also serve as a sort of ushering in for Tofu's remixes of Club Penguin's soundtracks becoming more prevalent. In her first scene of the chapter, the PSA headquarters theme from the DS games plays. On later appearances, though, Dot's presence is often accompanied by Disguised, a harsher sounding remix of the track that rapidly switches back and forth, from standoffish and intense to abrasive and agitated. It's a fantastic representation of her state of mind during Chapter 3, and I doubt Tofu could have made a better choice for which remix to start pushing first. Before long, Monobert shows up again to deliver the next motive. He declares that he's made a secondary override, which will let another person go to the new world. He says he'll give it to the first person to kill 2 people without getting caught, even bypassing the trial. Should this motive be used successfully, everyone who remains will continue with the killing game as normal. I found this motive odd at first, but I've since come around to appreciating it. For one thing, it opens up the potential for a character at this point in the game to reach the new world by taking the lives of just 2 people instead of 10 by way of the trial system, which could push characters reluctant to kill off everyone towards making a move. It also provides a decent reason for 2 victims to be killed in this chapter. However, I will argue this motive wouldn't be complete without the reveal of the execution simulator from earlier. At this point, we've already seen Frankie's reaction, and while Agent tried it out and their simulation failed, the realization of what happened is enough for them to warn everyone else not to touch it. Eventually, Klutzy and Rory's absence from the pizza parlor, despite their plans to meet there, prompts Agent to venture underground and find them, only to find Frankie's corpse instead. The body discovery announcement goes off, followed by another one soon after, which is shown to be for Cadence. Chapter 3's investigation feels more straightforward compared to its predecessors, which does make sense given that the characters would be somewhat accustomed to the process by now. Monobert even acknowledges how it's become tradition to hand out autopsy reports to everyone, despite him omitting all the useful information from them this time around. The areas the characters investigate all make sense, but feel more streamlined since there weren't as many incidents leading up to the murder as there were in Chapter 2. The one location that might feel out of place to some is the ski village, but it makes some sense to look there since it was the last time everyone was in the same place at once. And sure enough, they come upon a peculiar scene there, where Klutzy is trapped beneath a small cage with his ball and a rope cut in twain lying nearby. While the investigation feels like one of the more direct ones, it does become more interesting on a rewatch. In fact, it might be one of the most interesting of them all in that regard. This case also gives off the impression of a gradual increasing difficulty. While Chapter 2 is arguably more complex, Chapter 3 has the use of 2 victims to its advantage, and this leads to a few blind spots even the most perceptive of the group have to work to overcome in the trial. In trials with multiple victims, it's important for both deaths to be covered in about equal measure. If this isn't done, then the death with less focus can very easily come across as pointless and arbitrary, existing only to check off another item on the list of Danganronpa tropes to follow. Fortunately, Penguinronpa establishes a good reason to focus on both right off the bat when Dot proposes the possibility of there being 2 killers. Monobert explains that in such a scenario, only the most recent killer will be executed, while the other will be spared. Discussion then goes down something of a rabbit hole, starting with Frankie's cause of death. It doesn't take long to figure out that his killer drowned him using Cadence's scarf. During this time, Dot reveals that she had been in disguise as Klutzy the entire morning, using the disguise found during the last chapter. One can even realize the truth in the investigation, as Klutzy lacks the scratch on his shell during it. The case at hand becomes more perplexing as Dot testifies she overheard Frankie and Cadence in the ski village, which leads to the conclusion they were working together again. Much like how Cadence and Frankie's plan in Chapter 2 gave that case some more depth, having multiple overlapping schemes in a murder mystery is a tried and true method of making it more interesting. As it stands, it appears Frankie or Cadence would allow the other to kill them, and the killer would then murder a trapped Klutzy to take advantage of the motive. This marks the continuation of a running theme where he's often a target for murder. Towards the end of Chapter 2, Paige admitted Klutzy was her original target, but the circumstances of the killing game resulted in her struggling to find a window of opportunity. Here, the little crab comes close to death than he's ever been, and the reveal of the scratch on his shell indicates he's in an increasingly dangerous situation. Another interesting moment comes up when Monobert inadvertently reveals Frankie didn't commit suicide, implying he's not as infallible as he puffs himself up to be. With Frankie's death and the killer sorted, the focus shifts to Cadence's side of the case, as another new track, Elite Pondering Force, plays for the first time in the series. Once again, the details of the body discovery announcement become important to the case, and the sequence of events is quickly formed. Before Agent found Frankie's body in the hidden lake, someone else stumbled across Cadence, killing him. Cadence gave chase, but was then killed by this third party. The idea of a jackhammer being the most obvious murder weapon turns suspicion onto Rory due to his recent drilling, but Agent has a moment of doubt on realizing Dot had one yesterday too. It's here that the case's biggest flaw becomes apparent, one which Tofu acknowledged in their 2021 Q&A. There, Tofu said they felt Rory was too obvious of a killer, as the breakfast plans he made with Agent served as a huge red flag indicating something would happen with him soon. While Dot is still a potential suspect, Tofu felt it was clear she wasn't the killer, and her being the only other one considered during the trial doesn't help matters. There was definitely a need for another red herring or misdirection in this case. Though there is some dialogue about Shadow Guy acting a bit suspect in claiming there were no newspapers in a filing cabinet, this isn't mentioned during the trial, and Tofu admits it was more of a long-term hint than anything else. However, this part of the trial has its strengths. After Agent decides to stay quiet on the matter, Dot admits to having a jackhammer herself, and questions why Rory didn't bring this up despite knowing it. This, combined with her previous distrust, leads to the series' first scrum debate, the first use of a Danganronpa minigame other than the closing argument and rhythm game finales. It also doubles as a reference to Club Penguin loading screens, with even the text used in the debate being in fonts also seen in the game. The way the teams are split up even makes sense. All of the Penguins who believe Dot isn't the killer are EPF agents, while the remaining civilian characters side against her. Furthermore, Jetpack Guy is the only agent to believe Dot is the killer during this time. While this could have been done to even up the teams, I really like this little detail. It makes sense for Jetpack Guy's character, and follows on from Dot's turn being cause for doubt. One could even see this detail as a follow-up to the newfound doubt as a result of Paige's betrayal in Chapter 2. After that incident, the idea of another EPF agent resorting to murder has to be taken seriously, and JPG is the most serious of them all. Getting back to the trial, it's realized that Dot couldn't be the killer since she'd been in her klutzy disguise all morning, and so couldn't fit through the secret entrance to the boiler room to move the body. Rory's testimony corroborates this, and his actions during the trial start moving suspicion towards him again. As Agent presses further, Gary begins to cave into the possibility of the handyman being the killer, compared to earlier when he seemed in denial that could be the case. Just as Agent is about to suggest a way to prove the last bit of evidence against Rory, the latter confesses to the crime. He then laments the fact that even with everyone else around, he couldn't figure out why Cadence killed Frankie. Even during the closing argument, Agent admits the exact order of events before Frankie's death are hard to determine. As the trial reaches its climax, the differences between Penguinronpa's third trial compared to most third trials really start to make themselves known. Despite Rory only killing in self-defense, he makes no attempt to justify what he did, and tries to think of a way he could have avoided it. He doesn't have any over-the-top breakdown as he's being cornered like most third-case killers. He just gets nervous and defensive, eventually tearing up after being convicted. Rory apologizes for not just coming clean right away, says he wanted to figure out Cadence's motive, and cries at his failure there. Right before he's sent off to his execution, he acknowledges his mistake and urges the others to not let another murder happen. He even says Dot, who he had asserted could have been planning a murder of her own at the start of the chapter, had the right idea about the killing game needing to end. While Dot and Rory don't have many interactions, Chapter 3 tends to position them as the main rivalry among the cast for this part of the story. They clash with each other at the start, have an awkward off-screen encounter when Dot gets a jackhammer, and are then put into a situation where Dot, for the most part, leads the charge in indicting Rory. Despite this, the two seldom argue. The tragic circumstances of the case and Rory's status as a more sympathetic killer result in Dot having a quieter reaction than she did to Paige's reveal. In fact, all she does in response to Rory's show of respect to her is giving him a concerned look. Next, there's how this case handles its focus on the two murders. While Frankie's death did fall by the wayside as the trial went on, the full context of it is shown after the verdict. Cadence and Frankie intended to use the motive to their advantage. The plan was for Frankie to kill her, hide her body, and then kill Klutzy so he could see his bandmates again. However, the two are visibly nervous, and Frankie flees the scene. The two end up in the hidden lake, where Frankie explains what he saw in the execution simulator. True to its name, Frankie experienced a vision of his own execution, which ended with him reaching the new world, seeing his bandmates dead, and then being killed himself. Cadence tries to reassure him that they could still be alive since it was just a simulation, but Frankie says he saw them dead in his nightmares from the previous chapter too. A hint of this could even be seen by way of his reaction when Paige wonders what everyone else saw in their dreams while they were under the sleep-inducing song. The situation deteriorates further as Frankie says Cadence is all he has left if his bandmates are gone. Not wanting to see him in such a state, a distraught Cadence drowns Frankie. She immediately regrets this, but is caught in the act by Rory. Cadence then chases after him, tearfully crying that she isn't a bad person. I feel this scene does a good job of showing how much the stress of the killing game and its many workings are getting to the characters. Cadence and Frankie were among the more upbeat members of the cast at the beginning, but ever since being set up as scapegoats for Paige's murder plan, they went on a downward slide. They began to rely more and more on each other for emotional support, and when one of them broke, the other soon followed. Returning to Tofu's 2021 Q&A for a moment, Tofu said they felt Cadence deserved to survive the most out of all the characters who died prior to Chapter 5 Deadly Life. If she was a survivor, they felt she'd be an emotionally strong character, though perhaps not a full-on support character since she isn't among the smartest of the cast. These traits make themselves known rather well during Cadence's time in the story. She participates in a pretty shoddy plan and an even hastier cover-up in Chapter 2 which puts her and Frankie in the hot seat, and doesn't do much to reintegrate herself with the main group afterward. However, most of her time in Chapter 3 is dedicated towards consoling Frankie, and it takes the latter explaining his horrible visions for her to break. Given what we saw, the thought of her managing to calm Frankie in a world where he wasn't exposed to the execution simulator isn't too far-fetched. Back in the present, Rory's execution begins, and it's got a lot to like. Third verse, same as the first, it's based on a Club Penguin minigame, but with a deadly spin. In this case, Cart Surfer turned Cart Diffuser, where the player must defuse bombs in minecarts before time runs out. There's a couple of fun details in this scene, like how the cracks on the cart Rory fixes resemble those from Operation Spy and Seek, and a page in the book he uses to figure out how to defuse the bombs being a key clue for a future case. As Rory defuses the bombs, he's struck by power tools and is bleeding badly by the time he finishes the last one. Just as it seems like he's going to bleed to death after winning his execution, Monobird barges in on a train engine and rams it into Rory, killing him. One standout part of this sequence is its use of music. At time of writing, this is the only execution in Penguinronpa where the background music is from Club Penguin a majority of the time. Since it's based on Cart Surfer, the minigame's theme is used, and its fast pace is an excellent fit. The animation is well paced with the music, with certain beats even syncing with some of the bigger moments. While Rory's death is tragic, I do get a sense of gradually rising hope from this sequence when looking at the executions in order, at least in the grand scheme of things. Sensei at first seemed to be doing well in his bout against Monobird, but was then put into a situation where all he could do was struggle before being brutally stabbed through the chest. Paige got to round up some puffles, sort of, and see one she had at the time not seen before, only to be killed by the things she loved most. Rory stands out from the last two because he actually manages to complete the tasks set before him. The screen even displays a "You win!" with a little victory jingle after he defuses the last cart. Though he ultimately still dies, looking at the executions in this way alongside other details like Monobird accidentally admitting that Frankie's death wasn't a suicide gives the impression that his iron grip on the situation is starting to slip. For the time being though, the remaining survivors are distraught at Rory's death. Gary mourns him, saying his next invention will be made in his honor. While most of the others have the usual shocked reactions at the brutality of it all, Jetpack Guy, in all his sternness, says a murder won't happen again. When Monobird challenges him on this, JPG explains his reasoning. The more these murders happen, the less everyone is able to tolerate it, and those left will be all the more galvanized to unite and take down Monobird for good. However, Dot remains distant when JPG tries reaching out to her, still distrustful since the traitor may still be alive. Monobird confirms they are indeed still among the group, and withholds their identity since he finds Dot's unease more amusing. She leaves in a huff, and everyone else follows soon after, but Dot is nowhere to be found. While Agent wants to find her, JPG decides they can look for her in the morning, and face Monobird without her if she still won't cooperate. He continues with his thoughts on the killing game so far. He feels the situation has been a game to Monobert, and the group has been treating it as one too, with all the fun distractions they're trying to occupy themselves with. He boldly declares the game to be over as everyone else takes their leave. After sitting outside alone for a while, Agent notices Dot moving around in her klutzy disguise and tries to reconcile with her. What follows is what I consider to be one of the best scenes in the series. Agent tries to get Dot to be more open and rejoin the group, but she keeps her guard up, even saying she should trust Agent the least out of everyone. As the track Disguised blares in the background, she gives several reasons for this. Agent hiding their identity even from their own allies, their fast-track promotion to Director of the EPF, as well as their friendship with former enemy Klutzy. While there are caveats to each of these which the two address, Dot demands Agent tell her their identity if they want her trust back. As she does, her cold exterior begins to break. She tearfully begs Agent to give her a reason to trust them again, even using their nickname, Ace, from the DS games. Much like with Rory's execution just a few minutes prior, the timing of the music is spot on. The harsher tones of Disguise tend to coincide with Dot's frustration and standoffishness in this scene, while the brief breaks in the track are often paired with near silence from Agent and Dot's more conflicted moments. We then get a shocking reveal. Even Agent doesn't know their true identity. Cue New World Order. Agent explains that all they remember is their title as the ultimate secret agent, as well as the missions they've been on. This has led to a lot of pondering about themselves, why they're the only one like this, and if they're involved with the killing game in some way. Thus, Agent relates to Dot's struggles to trust others, especially since they don't know if they can trust themselves, and Dot finding them untrustworthy leads to them feeling they really are. With this revelation, Dot apologizes and explains why she has been so cold as of late. Despite her initial reaction to Paige being a killer, she didn't want her to die, but felt scared and hurt from the latter's betrayal. She feared confiding in anyone as she thought it'd make her an easy target. To avoid becoming another victim, she disguised her emotions. However, she also realizes she was wrong to distrust Agent. While she doesn't know the finer details about them, she knows the Agent in front of her is the same one she worked with for years in the EPF, the same one she recruited to join the agency in the first place. The music transitions from New World Order to the more hopeful-sounding Old World Order, as Dot declares her trust for Agent again, and the two embrace. The scene then transitions to Klutzy in the gadget room. Much like the scene outside, this one is also quite hopeful as the crab speaks to an unseen person via the wheelbot. The two are discussing a plan to end the killing game. While the dialogue indicates Klutzy isn't explaining the details to whoever's on the other side, the latter clearly has a lot of trust in them. They say they know Klutzy will be able to do what he needs to in order to end the killing game and save everyone, calling him partner as the scene fades to black. While these more uplifting scenes have no doubt rekindled some faith that the remaining characters will come out of this okay, the chapter still makes some time to acknowledge the low point which came before. A slow, somber tune plays over the end card, which is updated to include the deaths of Frankie, Cadence, and Rory. On that bittersweet note, Chapter 3 comes to a close. Given each chapter of a Danganronpa game or fangan is almost always marked by the death of at least one of its characters, it's important that each chapter serve its own specific role in the narrative. For Chapter 3 of Penguinronpa, I see it as the narrative's metaphorical death and rebirth, although this could be applied to Dot as well. It starts with things in disarray after the previous trial. Dot, Cadence, and Frankie find themselves feeling as though they're outside the core group for various reasons, and the killing game feels like it's truly set into motion after just 1 week. While some characters continue to try and come up with ways to take their minds off the recent murders, others succumb to the pressure after being in such a stressful environment for so long. This culminates in the highest body count in any case so far, and it happens all because of several unfortunate events. But unlike the last chapter, which splintered the group to begin with, this one pushes the group towards moving against Monobert. Add to this Klutzy's scene with the wheelbot showing them to have a plan to stop the killing game, and it seems things may start looking up for the characters soon. Much like how Chapter 2 ends with everything set into place for the major beats of Chapter 3 to transpire, so too does Chapter 3 leave off with many of its pieces set up for Chapter 4. While Chapter 3 may not be the best Penguinronpa has to offer in any particular aspect, I don't find it severely lacking either. In fact, it avoids many of the issues plaguing most of its counterparts. The inclusion of a double murder has some actual weight and reason behind it, and all the characters killed off get a little more time in the spotlight before their deaths. The case itself follows a logical flow, providing sufficient focus to both victims, and it doesn't have any major inconsistencies which feel overlooked. While the conclusion was a tad too obvious, the journey getting there was enjoyable, allowing for some interesting details and interactions to be worked in. The decision to give all parties involved a sympathetic motive allows for their deaths to hit even harder, and is a great transition from the more destructive murder last chapter to more cooperative twists and turns coming up. Though Chapter 3's events and characters may not be the most important to the overall story, plenty happens here to justify its existence. Remove it, and you eliminate a major part of Dot's character arc, overarching plot points like the reveal of the Jetbot, as well as important developments for the arcs of characters like Klutzy, Shadow Guy, and Gamma Gal. For all these reasons, I feel Penguinronpa succeeded in avoiding third case syndrome, and its conclusion is sure to leave the viewer thrilled for what comes next. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts. Also be sure to check out Tofu Damaru's channel for the actual Penguinronpa series and other content. My next video is in kind of an odd place with which fangan I'm planning to cover, but I'll cross that bridge when I get there. There's that, and the fact that it'll be the first of these which I'm not basing on a pre-existing script, so it may take me a minute to get everything figured out. In any case, I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone.